Right. Thank you all very much for coming. There's actually a... There's actually a lot more people here than I thought there'd be, so I really appreciate it. Right, so I wanted to name this talk Illusion Engine for kind of two reasons. One, because I mainly thought a lot of people that would come in here would be assuming that I'm going to show, how to make the perfect realistic image, or how to make something super perfect to the point where you can't differentiate the difference between what is real and what is fake. I mean, in some angles, that is true to what I try to do. But I think in many other aspects, the reason why I've called this illusion engine is because a lot of what I'm actually doing behind the scenes is kind of an illusion in a weird way. A lot of the things that I'm actually doing while I'm making a lot of my 3D assets on the surface look complicated, and behind the scenes is actually not. And so my goal with this kind of presentation, since I have 50 minutes with you guys, is to essentially break down a lot of the ways I build things and how I'm able to build it quickly, and to the point where I'm not caring too much anymore about having perfect outputs, but I'm prioritizing fast learning and doing things in a way where on the surface look complicated and kind of like magic. And I used to do a lot of magic as a kid, which I think is quite cool to have that kind of drawn relationship where I feel like on the surface things can look complicated, whereas behind the scenes there's a lot of just like, there's a lot of shortcuts and a lot of things that I take purely from the psychological perspective of knowing that when people look at a frame for a certain amount of seconds, where is their focus going to be? Where are people looking? And as a result, I'm taking shortcuts in other angles where aren't as necessary and might take a while to build, like a background scenery, for example. So, and I think also I draw a lot of inspiration, and I've had the great privilege to be able to speak to the team that work behind Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I think they share the same kind of incentive behind building quickly and prioritizing the outcome, but also the outcome needs to look a certain way, but the process doesn't need to be good, doesn't need to be perfect. Things can be scrappy, and I think I've learned that the hard way you don't have to prioritize making perfect things. There's a lot of talks going on over the last today and yesterday about, super organized files, super organized methods of doing things, and I almost feel like my method of creation is very much on the side of prioritizing ideas and creativity over the technicality of how things can be done. I rather spend most of my time on making an idea come to life as opposed to working out how to do the idea. So yeah, I hope this will be a full session of actual things that you guys can actually take home and do, because I think that's my goal with this is that, things can look super scary and feel like there's a studio behind something, when the reality is a lot of the things that I'm doing is incredibly accessible to almost everyone here. And I think, I prioritize a lot of multidisciplinary areas, mainly because I enjoy creating as opposed to being kind of narrowed into one box or doing something for one particular thing. I actually did a talk last week about imperfection kind of acting as the new proof of authenticity in this kind of new AI era, where ironically we're here to talk about realism, and we have AI things that can create realistic outputs in seconds. So then what is the point? What is the point of creating realism if we already have things that are creating realistic outcomes? And I think this is where kind of I'm taking on the side of, building communities, showing your flaws and failures are becoming way more kind of a thing that's allowing people to grow on social media, and for people to actually feel like there's a human and there's energy and there's effort behind things. I think I used to just purely use Instagram to post my animations, just the end outcome. And then I realized I grew more of an audience by posting the behind the scenes and how I make things and the failures that are involved in building either like a company or building animations or building anything. So I think it's interesting that we're in an era where AI is so easily accessible to create perfect outputs, and especially in this topic of realism. But my priority with realism is nothing to do with the outcome anymore. It used to be. I come from a kind of a painter background, used to do a lot of realism, portraiture artwork. I think in a way it got me in that trapped mindset of things have to be perfect and they have to take a long time to look a certain way. I realized that actually there's a great more deal of learning in the actual learning of the process itself, the actual journey, the effort, the human effort involved in creating things is the number one and the outcome is actually secondary, which I think a lot of people probably don't assume that that's kind of my mindset because they see these like outcomes I post on Instagram. But in reality, I think the outcomes only happen through the fact that I'm prioritizing failing quickly and learning as opposed to actually trying to make a perfect kind of render or a perfect whatever. So yeah, my goal today is for everyone that's here to basically be able to achieve anything that I'm creating and to show that it is incredibly achievable to everyone. And the fact that, yes, 80% of my time is spent on very surface level things in Blender. There's surface level or limitations or like a worse computer than perhaps people assume I have. And those limitations have allowed me to be more creative. And to find new ways around building things. And so, yeah, I will now only prioritize building something to gather kind of learning as opposed to taking ages to get that output only. And yeah, to create realism or to achieve a certain level of realism at a fast pace, you also have to understand kind of the fundamentals of what's important. Like, where are your eyes landing when you first look at something? What do I need to prioritize a little bit more as opposed to, you know, a background asset that no one's going to care about because they're looking at a certain thing? So yeah, let's get straight into it. I've got a lot of slides. Let's see how long this lasts. All right, so the first kind of topic I want to go through is how I animate things. So this was a commercial that I did for Samsung. It's a kind of a minute and a half video. It has music and narration and whatever, but yeah, essentially, from the outside, it took, like, a lot of people think that this might have taken like a big project. It took a long time, it was with a big company. But yeah, the actual animation itself from idea to finish took a week and maybe 2 days for the entire thing. And that might seem crazy because actually most of my time, ironically, was spent on actually going backwards and forwards with the client and with thumbnails and telling them what they kind of what my idea was. But once the idea was kind of locked in, it was kind of free ball for me to be like, okay, I have everything that I want scheduled in. It's now time to just create at a really rapid pace. Because like also now I'd spent a lot of time on this like planning phase, I now don't want to spend loads of time because I'm already very deep into actually building kind of in the project itself. I kind of want to move on. But yeah, this also, I've come here saying, oh yeah, you can make anything, and I'm showing like these perfect thumbnail sketches, which is ironic because actually probably 10% of my time is spent on perfect thumbnail drawings. Actually, 70% of my time is drawing really scrappy slam into paper thumbnails on my iPad that are horrendously drawn. But to the outside, or if I'm presenting to a company, of course, I kind of up the level a little bit. But my levels of I care ranges from, yeah, I really care for 10% of my projects where I actually have to put a bit of effort into presenting how the idea in my head and how I want it to look. The I care is like 20% of the time, sure, that like they probably just need a little bit of a visual. But 70% of my time is just trying to get an idea in my head onto paper because no one's going to look at it and it doesn't matter. It's just there to warrant, you know, getting the idea out of your head. But yeah, the first second of that Samsung animation, so just to go back a little bit, the kind of fade into the eye, seems like a very complicated shot. And to be honest, when I had the idea of doing an eye thing, I was like, I don't really know how I'm going to approach this, but I knew I wanted to not spend ages on it, and I wanted to go pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm basically going to break down essentially how it is made. And it looks complicated, but in reality, it really isn't. I think I am essentially using an eye, which you can obviously gather from anywhere. You can take a picture of your own eye. This example was a kind of a photo bash of lots of eyes. I just went into kind of Photoshop and merged them together to create like a really 4K iris image texture. I then used the exact same image texture in the black and white and masked it out to create kind of this like transparent layer over the top. And then I have a kind of glass shader, which has got no kind of material nodes. It's just the simple glass in Blender. And then you have kind of this void black hole in the middle. And these two weird, I don't know, I think they were like muscles in the eye. I had a little reference of what eyes do. And they have some movement going on when your pupil expands, your iris or pupil, whatever. So yeah, I kind of moved on to probably the most complicated part of this whole thing, which is really not complicated, was essentially getting a circular tube, or making just kind of a tube in Blender in a sphere, arraying it around in a circle, and then adding wave. That's all I did for the inside of the eye. I just added these two things that added detail, and they're not really doing anything other than adding detail. I want the illusion, again, of there's more complexity involved in whatever's happening, but the reality is this is a image texture of an iris, of an eye, that's had a displacement map just to add a bit of bump. And I'm using shape keys to expand the eye so that when the camera goes in, that's all involved. And I mean, I'm pretty certain everyone here would be able to recreate this iris. But let's talk about the eye, because now you're going, okay, well, the iris is an image of an eye that you made in Photoshop, and you've used an array and a wave modifier to fake these muscles. You've added them inside, and you've got a shape key opening the iris. All right, cool. So what about the texture of the skin? And again, remember the entire process of this project was a week and 2 days. So in the middle is an example of a ZBrush project, which I did purely for no reason other than to learn what's required to build a face. So this was ages ago, okay? This was ages ago, and this one took obviously flipping ages. It took probably like 4 weeks of watching videos, seeing what you have to do, how to create procedural skin, what's involved with hair like placement or whatever, and kind of the details. And this is like a bajillion polygons in the middle. However, like with this project, I needed to recreate the same kind of thing, but I'm obviously not going to spend 4 weeks now making a procedural face and going crazy. So we have an example of literally an image I took with my iPhone of the section of my eye that I wanted the camera to go in. And I knew majority of the shot was going to be in focal blur around it. And this whole idea of like, where is your eye landing? Well, I know we talk about an eye, but where is the viewer's eye landing when they're watching my animation? What is going to be the first thing they look at when they see this Samsung thing? And it's like, I want the movement and the narration and the music to really carry, and the visual is almost secondary in a weird way because it's going to be gone in 5 seconds, which means that spending all these 4 weeks doing the proper, perfect method of creating a face, I didn't feel like it was necessary. I spoke last year about kind of my method of texture stacking, which is using an image as your base model and then adding procedural nodes over the top in like this stack to try and increase the quality of the image texture that you're using. Obviously, if you just use a straight up image texture on a face, it doesn't always look good. I mean, obviously, the GOAT Ian Hubert is very good at that kind of image texture, increases detail and for assets that you don't need to really spend a lot of time on. And also, I knew that this model wasn't going to be used in any other angle. It was going to be used from this one shot only, because obviously I'd already planned the thumbnails. I knew exactly where the camera was going to be. It wasn't going to go around the face. Otherwise, yes, you might have to create a better model. But my time isn't worth making a better model all the way around when it's not needed, and I don't have the time for it. So yeah, the final outcome of kind of this thing was good enough for me to be like, okay, I've used 10% of my time that I would have used on the actual really high fidelity ZBrush model, which I actually made all the skin myself. And it's 70% good enough for me to be like, all right, let's move on to the next scene. And again, from the outside, I think this is why I'm calling it Illusion Engine, because it's all in a weird way kind of an illusion. I'm wanting people. The whole point of the Samsung animation was I see it as the big animation itself. This one scene was 1/10 of the whole thing. It's not worth my time, getting overly worked up about trying to make this 1 second bit perfect. When the reality is, I could do, like I said, kind of shorter method ways to create things. And this goes even down to the next scene in the animation, which is the one on the far left, which is kind of this almost Interstellar-inspired phone dropped out of the iris and then falls down. Go back. The video at the bottom is meant to be playing what it actually looks like, but it isn't. Oh well. But yeah, the actual behind the scenes of the scene itself, again, is primarily in focal blur. I want the concentration of the viewer's eyes to be on the phone, falling out of this kind of surrealist environment, and to move on to the next scene. It's a transitional scene. I don't want to focus on building an environment behind it or creating anything behind it. I mean, what I'm doing here is I built a kind of, in After Effects, I just made some lines that went up. I've used the lines with an emission shader. I've used kind of blacked out the white and black aspects to create kind of an alpha layer. It creates that kind of transparency between the lines. And yeah, then I'm just using cinematic focal, like bokeh behind it to make it kind of look like there's detail going on behind it. And then again, it's like, oh, well, how do you make bokeh? And this was a very kind of weird method that I somehow stumbled into, which was after looking at, obviously, cameras, the way that bokeh works with cameras is you're kind of taking that lens and you're making, you create, so you'll notice, so a lot of the bokeh in cameras is created from the lens or almost going in front of like this spherical thing. So I tried to recreate how a camera bokeh works in Blender by, all I literally did was add a circle with a hole in it and put it at just at the point, if you increase your focal depth in your camera and move that circle thing at a point, you have to keep kind of going back and testing where it actually hits. And then all of a sudden, you'll see in this kind of middle one, you start getting these kind of cool rings that cameras have when they create cinematic films. So this is using no add-ons. It's using kind of what a camera would do and trying to replicate that in Blender in the simplest way possible. So the scene itself, again, is a creation of things I've made in After Effects that I've just kind of slapped in like a way where it's a transitional scene. I want the phone to be moving out of this scene into the next shot. I don't want to be spending time creating detail, but I equally want it to look cool, good enough for me to move on. I want it to look cinematic, and also a great deal of that goes into the color compositing and actually going deeper into kind of the post section. Funnily enough, like a lot of the kind of chromatic aberration, cool effects, and increasing the saturation really helps sell, and also having that kind of greeny yellow tint really helps sell the whole kind of cinematic vibe. And I use this for a lot of projects. So a lot of my projects have there's a main focus that I'm looking at, and then behind the environment is this illusion of there's a lot going on, when in every single one of these projects, it's random displacements and emissions that I've kind of put in the background to kind of give the illusion that there's a lot going on, but the whole narration and the storyline is the main purpose of these shots. So I'm not focusing, I don't want to spend my time building things that are going to be on screen for 1 second, and if it's not needed for a studio, I know I could make it, but if it's not needed, I don't see kind of a purpose in I want to stay in this creativity bubble. I don't want to be kind of technically building things or wasting time. I want to move on to what's the next creative thing that I could build. So yeah, a lot of these shots, again, using that bokeh camera circle effect lens where you increase the depth of field and move that circle right up against your camera, creates this really cool kind of cinematic, focal lens background thing. The next shot in my Samsung, actually the last shot in the Samsung animation was this kind of closing scene. And I only bring this up because I actually got a lot of comments of people being like, the simulation you did at the end was really cool. And funny, there was no simulation. In fact, like everything here was me just parenting the whole keys to a empty. I got the general movement of how I wanted the keys to land, and then I animated everything kind of just as I imagined a key would land. And you can see in the bottom right, like the actual, I don't know what you'd call that, like circular, stringy thing that you have on keys. That was the worst shape key thing I could have ever done. But it happens so quickly. I just want to give the impression that there's it's almost like this kind of cloth sim going on with the actual keychain. There's no cloth sim going on because it lands in about 1 second. Your brain's already moved on to the next thing. I just want to give the impression as though something's landed. I mean, the mesh is literally warping out the wazoo. It's crazy. And so if you were to frame it one by one, it looks awful. But I'm again trying to move quickly, and I equally could do a cloth sim. Like, that is something that you could obviously do, but I knew this this animation probably took, I don't know, an afternoon or an evening, where I just wanted to get the impression of a key landing, and I didn't want to have to go through the headache of going through lots of things that could, simulations have issues. You have things intersecting, you have geometry being too high mesh, and you have to re-poly things. I didn't want any of that. I just knew it was going to be on screen, flipped on for a second, and then it was going to move off. Next one. This one is not for the Samsung video, but it's the same kind of principle of simulation acting. And I love how I'm saying this as though I don't do simulation. Like, there are plenty of times where I'll spend a whole, week trying to learn a simulation, but I'm here to show that actually 80% of my time is spent doing kind of almost illusion fakery, to the point where I'm prioritizing learning and getting an idea in my head down, as opposed to actually staying in that technicality on how to do something. So again, this was an example of a pan, which I wanted kind of an impression as though there was a kind of a layer of liquid in there. But I don't want to do a liquid simulation in a shot that is, I'm barely showing that there's liquid in there. I'm doing this shot purposely to show that, to give extra detail. I think a lot of what I love doing is you can push a shot to a certain extent, and then there's always a point where you think you're finished that you can definitely always push it another 10%. I think this was a good example of that, where the shot would have been fine without this water sim involved, but pushing the extra 10% kind of is what happens in real life when you look at things. So when you want to build this classroom environment, you probably will build it and create the walls, create everything white, and then you realize, okay, that's pretty much done. That looks like the classroom. But the extra 10% are all these kind of invisible details that we're not actually kind of paying attention to, the slight curvature of the carpet as it goes up the walls on the side, or the slight kind of I don't know, like erosion on the side of the walls of where the paint has gone, are things that we don't really pay attention to, but it's that extra 10% that actually sells a shot to be realistic. And I think a lot of people do stop before they feel like they're finished, and there's always just like maybe a slight push forward that you can increase your shot to sell that impression of whatever you're trying to convey. And this was an example of exactly that. So not using a water simulation, using 2 steps, which is literally adding dynamic paint and dropping some balls into the dynamic paint just to make the water kind of move, and then I bake the moving water, and then I've just plonked it under the pan itself. So again, like 3 steps involved with just pushing it that extra 10%, so you're selling the impression of something, as opposed to spending another 5 hours on a proper water sim, crashing your computer, and feeling enraged about the whole project. This was a project that I did for the Sidemen. They had a collaboration with Squid Games, and again, it was I was kind of tasked in a very short span of time to do a kind of this cookie, what you'd imagine to be a simulation, again, where the cookie is being simulated. The reality of this was I went into Procreate, created a very short kind of, you can see on the right, animation of a crack appearing. And then on the last node of my textures, I just put that crack kind of in the texture node tree, and then put the alpha, you can see at the bottom, the alpha to 0, which then makes the cookie look like it's cracking, when the reality again was no cookie is cracking. It is a cookie with an image of video cracking. And then you can then push it further, and you create then these kind of extra, it then chops into, so the actual parts that are flying away is a completely different cookie that I've cracked open, and I've done a hard cut between the frames, so then it kind of gives the impression like the crack created the cracking into its pieces. These were a few projects for various other kind of marketing material, whether it's my own thing or for someone else, where Again, something that looks super complicated, being kind of stitches in Blender, actually is all done in the modifiers section. So everything here from using a vertex paint weight modifier, and essentially just using kind of vertex weight, mask, and displacement, and you can kind of see what's going on the far left, as a way to kind of give the illusion again of this kind of simulation going on when everything's done in the modifiers section. I really think a very underused modifier, and I'm a big fan of, is the vertex weight proximity. I think it's cool because I've spent a lot of time, obviously now, trying to learn geometry nodes, but before then, there's a lot of things which look like they're made in geometry nodes, which you can make using the vertex weight proximity and a mask modifier. The next slide being exactly that. So this was a project for Vandy the Pink, and he did a collab. And so, yeah, this was a project where he wanted kind of this reveal of the shoe color kind of coming out. And it looks it's very doable in geometry nodes. But again, if you don't want to use geometry nodes and it's kind of too scary, and it's too scary to the point where you're not even starting, I think starting and acting is definitely more of a priority to me, as opposed to kind of getting overly worked up on not knowing how to do something and then not doing it at all. This was an example of literally, I'm using 2 modifiers to create this entire effect. It's taking the section that you want to reveal, doubling it, so you have now 2 layers of the geometry on top of each other. Obviously, one of them being the white, the other one being the color that you actually want to show that's getting revealed. And then you're essentially adding a vertex weight proximity, which is this empty that you can see in the middle. When you move it kind of towards in the geometry, it kind of, I don't know what you'd call that, just kind of, it shows where the proximity empty is moving towards your geometry. And then I'm using a mask to kind of get rid of the section that's blue. And then obviously you can take it a bit further on the right by adding a displacement then on the section that's green that you get from the vertex weight proximity. And yeah, again, it's probably like an afternoon type animation which looks a lot more complicated than the reality of actually creating this is. And again, you can make this in geometry nodes. And I think there's a great deal of learnings that you can take from actually, sitting down and prioritizing spending time doing geometry nodes. But also in a lot of aspects, for projects like this where you don't have the time, that those limitations of not having the time and realizing I don't have the time to learn this new thing right now, what can I do that can get me 60% of the way there? And this was exactly kind of that. It's limitations create creativity in a lot of aspects, because without the fact that I was on a tight deadline, maybe this wouldn't have been my solution, and maybe I would have spent the next 2 weeks learning geometry nodes to do something similar. Okay, so kind of the next area, which I want to do a little touch point on, is 2D graphics. So these were some animations that I put on Instagram, which again, the illusion of these animations were to give the impression that I'd made it in After Effects. I was very inspired by a lot of cool animations that I'd seen, and that kind of After Effects kind of look that you get. But at the same time, I wanted to see if I could do it in Blender. And I think this was a great example of seeing another, or maybe a lot of artists particularly feel like once they've found their lane, they have to stick within a certain kind of genre. Whereas in my head, if something feels out of reach, or I'm like, okay, I don't know how to make that, I kind of see that more as like a green flag of like, okay, well, that is a touch point or an area that I don't know a lot of. That means kind of there's a lot of learnings that can come out from that. And so these animation, the animation in the middle was purely an animation for prioritizing learning how to make something like an After Effects animation, but in Blender. And then the one on the right was then a project which I could then, once the client had seen the middle one, we're like, oh, that's cool. Can you make something like that for us? So yeah, I'm going to break down kind of how I'm able to make these, or kind of what's involved with making them. Because again, it's the same kind of principles, and it's the only way that I'm able to make things quickly over a lot of different areas, is because I'm not worrying too much about the outcome. I'm prioritizing what I need to take, what's the first step to make this right now? I think a lot of the things that I try and do when I'm looking at someone who I'm really inspired by is really break down, like, this looks unachievable for me right now. Like, in my head, I am a certain category of artist, so I cannot do this style. But I think when you realize that a lot of styles and a lot of disciplines and also a lot of skills all start off with these very beginner stages that is almost accessible to literally everyone. So I think I oftentimes try to forget about, okay, I'm trying to make this complicated animation. What's the first thing that I can do in the next hour? Or what's the first step that I could take right now that's going to kind of get that ball rolling and make it feel like I can do it? So yeah, this was a kind of mainly a texture thing going on. Obviously, the movement itself of the gun is, kind of going up and down, it's going straight in. There's not a lot going on. Everything that is giving this impression of complexity is down to the textures, which again isn't complex. I'm using. So at the top, I created this kind of grainy map that in Procreate, or you could obviously use kind of create it anywhere. And then you'll see in the next slide. I've got my base color of the gun, got this geometry, I'm using geometry tangent, and I have no reason to use that other than I was flicking through the geometry kind of things that they have, and the tangent section had the side of the panel of the gun that I wanted the grainy lines to animate through, and I was like, okay, sick. So then I used the geometry tangent as the mask, and then the lines at the bottom is only moving because I'm animating the map on the texture coordinate. So there's, again, not a lot of animation going on other than this illusion of detail and complexity going on, when in reality it's a base color with the lines that I made in Procreate moving from the map. And I use that for the background of so if we go backwards, the background shot, the blue is using the same lines, just being animated on the mapping. The actual kind of this triangular thing that's coming out is a shape key it's a kind of a square panel coming down, or a rectangle panel coming down, then the shape key is expanding. And again, it's only got kind of those lines. It looks like the lines are moving because I've just put my line graph thing over the top and put it as slightly transparent so you can still see the color behind it, but you also have this impression of like movement going on. And again, this shot appears on the screen for 2 seconds. So the idea of this piece was the piece itself is the art. It's not spending time on this 1 second thing that's it's part of the whole bigger picture. So yeah, this was one of the animations for during the Samsung project that I did, where I was making this like multiverse thing. And I think the reason a lot of people go like, oh God, like only a week and a half to do the Samsung project was because I basically tried to incorporate a lot of art styles in one thing, which always looks like it's going to take ages. Again, this was a project where I wanted to move on very quickly and to have creativity and just be in that process of enjoying making it as opposed to worrying about the outcome. And so, yeah, this was a grease pencil animation at the top, which I exported out as a kind of .mov.mp4. And then, literally put it into the node tree, the base rock, grease pencil, and then geometry pointiness. Once you've added a displacement, allows you to kind of look around. It kind of masks out the areas that are kind of pointy, which in this aspect, because we're using displacement on the movie, is going to be the kind of the characters and the deer that's involved in this shot. Another kind of happy accident, which happened during this, I think it was one of the Punisher challenges, not this year, last year, was I really wanted to create this, again, like multiverse 3-style animation where you have this ultra realism going into kind of Spider-Verse and then into kind of like stop motion. And one of the happy accidents that kind of happened was creating this like really sketchy looking outline around the main character in the second part of the animation. And I wasn't planning on making this kind of white outline, but as I was kind of having a play around with my character in grease pencil, it was a 3-step process of clicking the character, pressing add grease pencil around your object, and then going in the modifiers, and then adding the multiple lines modifier, which then makes these multiple lines. And then I just exported that as this black plane, and then composited it in for the final animation at the top. But again, it adds that 10% detail, as though I've kind of taken my time to sketch around the character. It kind of adds that complexity element to the shot, which would have been perfectly fine without it. I think I spent enough time kind of trying to learn how to make that Spider-Verse or kind of Ninja Turtle environment that it didn't really need this extra kind of outline of sketchy around the character, but I think it really helps because it's that point where you feel like you could stop, and pushing that extra 10% really sells the actual end outcome of your animation. This was another kind of project for Samsung, which was an entirely kind of other, I don't really know how to describe the style because I don't really know what it is. I just kind of had an idea, and again, a lot of my behind the scenes and my projects aren't neat. I think that in a lot of aspects, studios would hate me because my process to making things isn't very organized. It prioritizes making things now and kind of acting on ideas as opposed to having like a really smooth timeline. I'm sure, obviously, if there was a scenario where I needed to do something for a studio, I'd have to buck up my ideas a little bit and be a bit neater. But yeah, a lot of the times, everything is in this space of creating now and not worrying about failing and making imperfections and being perfect. It's more about getting that your idea in your head onto a screen or into Blender. So the next kind of area that I want to talk about is modeling, kind of character design, rigging, that kind of thing. And I think it's ironic that I talk about all these fast processes because I'm also kind of a hypocrite because I do like to spend, a good amount of time doing things the proper way. And of course, if you spend all your time kind of cutting and cheating, you're never actually going to learn anything properly because you won't actually know what the proper way to do it is. I think you're only able to take shortcuts once you kind of know how to do it the proper way. And so again, for the Punisher challenge, I kind of took this as a cool opportunity to be like, okay, I want to learn how to do character rigging for the whole process, from the texturing to lighting it and rigging it properly and hand animating and getting the kind of muscle movements. And you learn, doing it this way is great because you learn heaps from doing it the proper long way. But I know that when I'm going into this, I know I'm doing it purposely to get that learnings out of it, as opposed to being like, okay, I'm getting a cool outcome out of it, because I still believe there'd be a way to create the similar outcome in a shorter span of time. But yeah, this was a kind of example of me being a hypocrite, because I do love kind of going into the nerdy kind of deep dives into how things actually need to be built. So then I can be like, okay, what are areas that I can now shortcut to build quickly? And yeah, this was another example of that, of trying to see what's involved with building a kind of game-ready dragon. I didn't want to just do a sculpt that's super high poly, because then you can't use it. I wanted to go through the whole notion of what's involved with actually building these complicated-looking things, which oftentimes would actually probably prevent you from starting something. But I kind of go into it with the idea that, okay, everything begins as something super achievable. I think everyone here could go home and make a block sculpt of a dragon that looks like the one at the top, because it is achievable. And I think that's the thing with a lot of skills, is it's daunting to be like, I want to make this, but it's very achievable to be like, I want to make the dragon at the top. And you realize that a lot of what's involved with actually making the dragon is kind of blindsiding your head out of the fact you've got all these things ahead of you to learn, but you're doing it one step at a time. Okay, I've got the block down. What's the next thing that I can do tomorrow that's gonna, take the next step further? And when you start kind of doing it in that way, as opposed to thinking of it as the whole kind of picture, all of a sudden anything becomes achievable, I think, or anything becomes learnable. Like, there wasn't a time where I'd be like, oh, I think I could make that dragon. But every time I look at the one at the top, I go, oh, I can make that. And then the next stage to that is, oh, I can make that. Oh, I can make that. Until eventually you've done enough of these compounding things where you go and go, oh, I made the thing at the bottom. How the hell did that happen? And I think that happens with basically everything now. I think what I tried to show on my Instagram is the fact that there's a lot of things that people say, oh, shoes are really impossible to model, or, you know, the hardest thing to model is a train, or I don't know, there's a lot of things. And I do kind of take pride in liking modeling things from scratch. And it also goes against what I was saying earlier about making things quickly. But at the same time, you learn a great deal from building things from scratch. Even if you're not using the asset, you're learning that all these complicated forms start off as really basic shapes. And again, like a shoe model is complicated. Sure, if you're looking at it from the perspective of, I need to make this really hard-looking, like weird shape. But if you start as what is the shape that I can make right now, which in my aspect, I always start off with the sole, because it always feels like the easiest bit to start with. And the irony of acting is you end up in that flow state of, okay, you've done the first thing that seems complicated, what's the next now thing that I can push it further to start building the rest of the model. So yeah, a lot of it. Then when you realize everything is just these forms when they begin with, every single person in here would be able to build all the 3D models on the side. And I think in many aspects, because I came from being a painter and a realism artist, that kind of mindset is how I used to think about literally painting or drawing any portrait. Was the end outcome seems very terrifying to be like, okay, this is something I'm trying to paint. But the irony of everything is I'm looking at everything as shapes and segments. And I say to myself, can I make, you know, this quarter of an eye? And I don't look at it almost as an eye. I look at it as a shape and kind of colors. And I go, okay, that looks like something I could do. That looks achievable. And then once you start stacking these achievable things on top of each other, you end up with this end outcome that feels like it would be hard. And I'm not trying to undersell it, but I think in my head I kind of go like, anyone can do these things if they take them at kind of one section at a time. But yeah, there is also many aspects where modeling fast is a thing that you need to do. This was a show that I was on with my good friends in Melbourne called Nownish on YouTube, where they do these art challenges. And I did a 5-hour art challenge and a 3-hour art challenge, where it was kind of building an animation in a short span of time. And in those aspects, again, you have this limitation of time. So what can you build in the span of time that you have? So the animation on the right was the 5-hour art challenge. And to model the drone within the time, I knew I only had an hour slot to model and texture the drone. And so I'm modeling the drone with a mirror modifier because, again, once you're modeling things with kind of, you're realizing you want to kind of elude detail, but I don't want to build this really complicated thing. I knew I was going to have to animate the drone, so I didn't want to do legs, because then it's going to involve me having to make good legs within 5 hours. So I was like, okay, got to make a drone, because then I can fly, and I don't have to do any kind of complicated animations other than making this like this cube fly. Again, and yeah, it was built with a mirror modifier, so actually the drone itself, I only have to look at it from, can I make half of that thing? So, and then obviously when you add the mirror modifier, you then have this full drone, but you're chunking it in sections that feel achievable in the time that I have. And then the animation on the left was a 3-hour art challenge, which was me trying to recreate this kind of Matrix style shot, which again, I didn't want to have to rig a character or photo scan myself and then rig it up and then add it, whatever. So I ended up doing the jankiest setup on earth, which is me on a chair spinning on a green screen, and then After Effectsing my image footage, parenting a camera to the spin of the chair, which then kind of gave the illusion that the whole scene was flying around me, when in reality the camera was parented to the video file, if that makes sense. which again, it was again giving the illusion of something complicated going on, when a lot of the times it's not complicated, or it's pushing that extra 10%, which is what this is an example of. So the top shot being me just adding 2 keyframes of the drone coming in, then that would be a fine shot. But then it doesn't take much longer for me to then make the arms spin in a circle. And at the bottom, it's the same as the better, but this time I've added a noise modifier to the movement of the drone, which just adds these super subtle, like slight vibrations to the drone as it's coming in, which reality probably didn't need to include, but it pushes it that extra 10%. That gives the impression that something more complicated is going on. It's giving complexity of movement, when again, it probably didn't need to have it, but it's good to be able to give the impression that something more complicated is going on. And this whole process is, done within, I don't know, like 10 minutes of 2 keyframes coming in, spinning the arms, adding a noise modifier to add that extra kind of level of detail. These were some of the shots that I showed last year on kind of my presentation. And yeah, they're the ones that especially the middle one, for some reason went viral on Instagram, and people thinking that it was like a really complicated thing. But I'm able to publish these renders out so quickly because a lot of the times, it's going to be very exposing, if I'm not using this asset and I'm primarily using it for these images, I know I'm making this render for this exact image. I had the idea in my head for this image. That's what I want to create. Meaning I know I didn't need to use the face model. I don't need to build a head on the neck, because in my head that was what I wanted. Obviously, in many aspects, if I'm gonna do a short film and I need the camera going round, I'll take a different approach. It'll probably be better to do the proper approach. But in these examples, they were demonstrations of ideas of products I had in my head that I wanted to present to maybe like a company or someone that wanted to collaborate with us. And I knew I just needed the idea to be on paper for them to look at. And so again, yeah, it's like if I was to give these files on Patreon, I'd have to really go through them and make them properly, because I don't feel like I'd be able to distribute these out to people, because yeah, they were there they're built for a purpose of the camera view. The arm, I mean, a lot of this project was mainly in the texturing. A lot of effort went way more into texturing and the actual designs of the necklace, and like I wanted all my time to be spent on what the necklace looks like or what the watch looks like. I didn't want to spend time rigging a hand model. And I knew that the textures was going to play a more important role, and the lighting was going to play a more important role. So in this aspect, I don't even know why the head is crushed. I don't know. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe the lighting was coming in at a strange angle, and I just decided to start warping it at the top. But the reason there's a big circle blob on the neck was just to also give the impression that there is a head by having shadow. So of course there is going to be a head on top of the neck, but obviously you're not seeing the head, so I'm just adding a circle there as a shadow, kind of acting as a shadow. Another thing, technical drawings, probably another aspect which seems really boring and complicated, and I don't want to do that. But a lot of the times, if I'm presenting products or an idea for something to anyone that I want to pitch an idea to, it's also very nice to have technical drawings. Again, it's cool to be able to know the proper way to do it. So I come from like a product design kind of background, so I enjoy the actual process of doing AutoCAD's like proper technical drawings, and I understand how to build it. But again, every single one of these wasn't built that way. It's either built with add grease pencil and then exporting the grease pencil, adding it in Procreate, not even Photoshop, in Procreate on my iPad, and then sometimes just adding more lines over it. And same with kind of this image on the left. I've took a screenshot of Blender, added it in Procreate, drawn around my screenshot, and just presented it in a way that gives the illusion of complexity. And at the same time, this is helping me to kind of understand, and also every single one of these, a lot of these designs on the right were used for manufacturing the actual jumper itself. So it wasn't even like there was limitations to doing this the shorter way. In many aspects, I saved myself a lot of time, and was able to not spend a lot of money on samples because the manufacturers had to a T kind of example of how the jumper should look, or how the clothing should look, or the product should look. And I haven't ran into the limitations of why I shouldn't be doing it the proper way, because a lot of times this is a lot more than a lot of these manufacturers get anyway from clients that want to manufacture products. They mainly just get like a sketch or like an idea, but providing people with like an image as well as technical drawings already, even though they're not taking me a lot longer than a lot of other tasks, it's putting it in a different bracket and allowing me to then not spend as much money on having to go backwards and forwards on products that are coming in and they've been wrongly measured or wrongly sampled. And then of course, the last kind of aspect, texturing, which I didn't kind of want to go over too much because of the fact that I have a 50-minute tutorial on YouTube, which is awfully audioed. So I actually kind of don't recommend, unless you want to listen to underwater tutorial. But this is what I showed last year on the presentation. So a lot of my texturing goes down to having this base texture. This could either start off as maybe something I've painted in Procreate, or perhaps it's an image texture that you're beginning with. And then I'm having a mask, mix shader, then the BSDF. And I keep stacking these. This process is pretty much how I texture almost everything, or any item, which again, you can incorporate as many masks and mix shaders as possible, but it's starting off with an image texture or something that, or you've painted this texture, which is basically your just prime diffusion, a diffuse layer texture, and then you're masking out perhaps geometry, or maybe the slight rim around the coffee cup, adding a BSTF to create like this milk trail around the edge, adding another mask at the top to mask out some of the areas of the coffee, adding BSDF. And yeah, I constantly do this process until I get to the end, which I always typically, unless it's, I don't know, weird organic shapes, have like an ambient occlusion or a geometry pointiness, just to add that, again, the extra 10% of detail, which I think ambient occlusion really helps with, just adding kind of that, maybe, I don't know, slight dirt around corners of rooms, or something that you really don't look at, or don't, invisible details. There are details which feel like you could overlook, but a lot of the times it's those invisible details that actually take your renders to the next level. And so yeah, what is the point of all these? What is the point of trying to learn every creative skill? In many aspects, there isn't a good point, because you could be happy in one aspect and you really enjoy 2D animation, or you really enjoy product designing, or you really enjoy animation, or you really enjoy technical kind of math side of things. But the reason I do it is for creative freedom. I'm not here, like, I love the fact that I could kind of go really deep into the technicality on how to build things, but I'm here to create ideas. I think that's the genre of the space I want to stay in. I want to stay in having an idea one morning and then having Blender as kind of my kind of side companion to create that idea into a physical or a tangible thing, or something to present to someone. And it means that, you know, I have friends in Melbourne, again, Nownish, who were basically saying, like, if they wanted a new website. I was like, oh, that sounds fun. A website on the left. Or they wanted kind of their merchandising to have like this photo shoot, and obviously would probably take a while to kind of buy in kind of this big whiteboard and add paper and whatever, and this can be faked in Blender using 3D, or maybe the 2D graphics for the website, or kind of merchandising using Illustrator. And so a lot of what I enjoy is being able to have the surface level knowledge on a lot of areas, to be able to to be able to say, you know, do you want merchandising? Yeah, I can make it in kind of on an iPad using Procreate, do a digital illustration, take it into Blender, so this is an entirely 3D scene, kind of create marketing for their merchandising, and then in the same kind of week, create the assets for their website, and then build an entire website around everything. And everything that I'm doing is for the idea of creation, as opposed to, you know, being technically good at things, or spending weeks making a website, making sure it's flawless. I think there's not a great deal of benefit of going, when something is 70% good and, spending another 3 weeks to try and get it to 100%, I'd rather get it to 70% and then move on to something else and have fun doing that. Take it to 70%, move on to digital illustration. And so, yeah, for me, it means having full creative freedom to not have to rely on certain people to do illustrations or to do merchandising or to come up with an idea, sketch it. I have to wait for someone to do the technical illustrations and then wait for someone to animate it, for then to wait or to employ someone to market it with an animation. I love the fact that because I'm surface leveling over a lot of areas, it means that most of my time is spent being creative, as opposed to working out how to technically do something. And so, yeah, these are all examples of products which, for my brand and IP that I was trying to grow called FigureGot, where I will have an idea in the morning for something. This was an example of kind of keycaps, or like the mechanical keys on your keyboard as like a mechanism to have these like charms for like a necklace. And I wanted to see visually how that would look. And there's a lot of companies that do kind of jewelry, which I could then present this idea to, try and get a collab, create like a pitch deck around a product which isn't real, but gives the illusion of that it's there. So it's almost like good kind of convincing engine for your ideas to be like, to explain to someone that you're lessening that lag time between having an idea and having someone understand that idea. I think, and the more you can lessen that through kind of visuals is how you kind of get these yeses, and you get as many yeses as possible, and it opens doors for you. And so, yeah, again, all these are 3D, and it means that I'm able to kind of reverse market a brand. I don't need to wait for manufacturers to come with the physical items. I could make them in 3D because I love designing things. I love kind of texturing, and I love that photo shoot and trying to fake it to make it look like you've put it on a wall and you've taken pictures of it. And then I can kind of market it on Instagram in this reverse way where I don't have the product, but if people like it enough, I could then now give the product with its technical drawings to a manufacturer and then make the product. And it means that all my time wasn't spent waiting for product samples to come in. Most of my time was spent being creative and trying to output ideas. So again, this was a proposal that I kind of was sending off to phone companies to be like, is this something you'd want to work with? And it's cool because a lot of these companies get sketches or just general calls and ideas, and it's nice to be able to design something on an iPad, make it look real, so then they're almost kind of convinced to be like, yeah, this is something I want to create with you. You're kind of doing half the job for them. And it allows, like, full creativity allows for any idea that probably could never get created to at least, maybe one day someone will fund some crazy loony idea. But until that point, it's nice to be able to have an idea in your head, and even if you had like a 10% chance of someone funding some crazy, gadget, whatever, I like the fact that that's a chance that could happen, as opposed to not starting at all and having none of that chance, or no one ever taking the risk on an idea. And so, yeah, it means that in a lot of aspects, I think I always thought it was to my demise that I never had a style, because I enjoy lots of areas. The images at the top were lots of different posters that I did for my brand about a year ago, and in many aspects, it kind of doesn't look like there's an artist behind it, because I'm just doing different styles that I'm interested in and wanting to see how they look. And I don't know if it's kind of to my pro or to my con, but I just know that I enjoy being like, okay, this is something that, it's a style or an area that I haven't touched on yet. I want to learn how to do it. The renders at the bottom were for the render network, which are these kind of big immersive rooms that are going to be in New York that you can kind of walk in and have this animation play. And I think it's just very fun to be able to play around and be in the creative space as opposed to being in the technical space or having the studio mindset of things are gatekept or too hard for people to understand. I think obviously there's a lot of amazing studios here, and a lot of their processes are perfect. They're neat. They take weeks. And I mean, in many aspects, they have to be that way, because if you want, clients have, they want to change things, you have to have that flexibility to be able to change things. But as a solo artist, I'm in the area of wanting just to create as fast as possible, and I want to try and get good at things. And I almost feel like, for me, if I reach a certain level where I feel like there's not enough learning, I enjoy being able to pivot to something else, start as a beginner all the way again, and humble myself and be like, okay, I suck at this one thing, but it also means that the roof is so large that there's so much learning involved. So it almost kind of, I'm going to, sure, maybe one day I'll burn out, I don't know. Maybe that will happen, but for now, every time I feel like I reached a level of burnout, I tend to just keep pivoting to something else where I'm a beginner again at it, because it almost kind of makes me more motivated, because I'm now just like, oh, well, I suck at this area all over again, which means I've got a lot of things to learn from, and I think that's a good thing to be in that space, or in that headspace. And so, yeah, I still do traditional drawings. This was a drawing that I originally did a render of in Blender, then just kind of had the render on my iPad and then drew the render. It's just fun to be able to use different areas and to build things that, I mean, are that line between digital and physical. Again, this was a kind of mural I did in Melbourne a month ago, which again, it was cool because I was able to incorporate some Blender kind of glitchy things at the top to try and bring together that, digital and physical aspect of some of my work. But everything that I did spanned from my original drawings when I was 17, which got me into the loop of being a perfectionist. And I think Blender was kind of that output for me of like, as much as they were cool to do a drawing and to spend like a month or 2 months doing one drawing, it was very frustrating, because if you didn't like the drawing after about 3 weeks, or you didn't like the photo or whatever, it's like the amount of hours you put into it feels very draining. And that was what spurred this whole, okay, you have to, especially in this new AI era where everything's perfect, I think actually prioritizing failing faster and failing and actually not prioritizing being perfect. And a lot of this kind of represents bad things for me, because this was the era of my life where everything had to be perfect, everything had to be precision, had to take ages to be good. And I think I realized that isn't the best headspace to be in, because then you never actually start anything. And so, I think in 2025, I think the rarest skill is no longer going to be just kind of like technical execution. I think, especially in AI, where you can now be technically good at anything, you can create technical, really perfect images. I think we're going to be living in an era where you're going to prioritize failing faster, failing more often, failing publicly. So then you're building this community around people that relate to what you're creating. And you're learning quicker, and you're using your learnings as your primary, and your output is kind of secondary, not as important anymore. That's all I have. Thank you very much.